In the winter of 1885, New York's Fifth Avenue glittered with wealth, power, and secrets. Behind the shining windows of its mansions, the city's most powerful families wrote the future of America. But inside one home, a magnificent limestone palace belonging to Eleanor Fairchild, something darker was unfolding. What began as a widow's grief over her husband's death soon spiraled into a nightmare of conspiracy, murder, and madness. The official records say Eleanor died from hysteria-driven suicide. But newly discovered letters, hidden for over a century in the walls of a demolished Wall Street building, tell another story, one far more sinister. This is not just the tale of a grieving widow. It is the story of how the financial elite of the Gilded Age built their fortunes on orchestrated death, and how they silenced the one woman brave enough to expose them. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe and let us know in the comments what city or state you're watching from. We love hearing from mystery lovers all around the world. Now, the truth about Eleanor Fairchild doesn't begin with her death. It begins with the strange and terrifying night her husband, Theodore Fairchild, took his last breath. The setting: New York, 1885. New York City in 1885 was a place of extremes. Fifth Avenue's towering mansions sparkled with crystal chandeliers and European art. Wealthy families hosted banquets that set the standard for America's high society. But just a few blocks away, immigrants lived in crumbling tenements, factories roared with child labor, and labor strikes ended in blood. And at the center of this gilded chaos sat Wall Street, an empire where men made and lost millions overnight. One of its brightest stars was Theodore Fairchild. At just 45, he was already a legend, known as the Oracle of Exchange Place. Some said he had an unnatural gift for predicting the market, always making money when others lost it. His wife, Eleanor, was nothing like the cruel caricatures of society wives. She was kind, sharp, and deeply devoted to her husband. Together, they became one of the most admired couples in New York. Their mansion at 847 Fifth Avenue was a palace of limestone and marble, with sweeping staircases and rooms filled with priceless paintings. At its heart was Theodore's private study, his sanctuary, lined with leather-bound books and guarded by a massive iron safe where he kept his darkest business secrets. The dinner of November 17, 1885. The night it all began seemed ordinary enough. Eleanor spent the afternoon preparing one of her famous dinner gatherings. The kitchen staff roasted duck, chilled imported oysters, and prepared Theodore's favorite dessert, Charlotte Russe. The silver sparkled, the crystal gleamed, every detail was perfect. But from the moment the guests arrived, Eleanor sensed something was different. That evening, 3 of the most powerful men in America joined them. Harrison Kensington, the silver-haired banker who controlled most of New York's railroad money. Marcus Cromwell, a sharp-featured shipping magnate whose empire ruled the East Coast ports. James Wainwright, young, arrogant, and wealthy from his family's textile mills. Eleanor had hosted them many times before. She knew the rhythm of their conversations, the way they bantered and bragged. But tonight, the air felt heavier. The men spoke in hushed tones, their laughter forced, their glances sharp and secretive. The uneasy meal. During the soup course, Eleanor caught fragments of a chilling whisper. Greater than the Pittsburgh situation. A problem, it needs to be resolved permanently. When she tried to lighten the mood with a story from society gossip, the entire table went silent. The men stared down at their plates, as if she had spoken out of turn at a funeral. Her cheeks burned. She had never been made to feel so out of place in her own home. And Theodore, her husband, her partner, looked worse than she had ever seen him. His normally steady hands shook as he reached for his glass. His face was pale, slick with sweat. His eyes, usually so sharp and alive, looked haunted. When she leaned in and asked quietly, "Are you feeling well, dear?" He brushed her off with a trembling smile. "It's nothing," he whispered. "Just the strain of a complicated deal." But Eleanor knew better. Something was terribly wrong. A shadow over the Fairchilds. The rest of the dinner dragged on awkwardly. The men ate, but with little appetite. Their words, usually bold and booming, came in cautious fragments. Eleanor noticed the way Kensington's hand lingered on his pocket watch, as if counting the seconds. The way Cromwell's eyes darted toward Theodore, watching him too closely. And the way Wainwright's lips curled in a half-smile when Theodore's hand shook. These men weren't friends. They weren't colleagues. They were wolves circling a wounded animal. Eleanor excused herself early, feigning a headache, but from the shadowed hallway she watched as the men leaned closer to her husband. Their voices dropped so low she could barely catch a word, yet she could feel the weight of their plotting. Her blood ran cold. That night, the grand Fairchild mansion was filled not with laughter and music, but with whispers of something dark, something fatal. And within hours, Theodore Fairchild, the Oracle of Exchange Place, would be dead. Fire. End of Part 1. Fire. What really happened in the Fairchild mansion that night? Who were these powerful men whispering about murder? And what secrets did Theodore keep locked in his private study? Stay tuned for Part 2 of The Haunting of Eleanor Fairchild. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments if you think Theodore's death was an accident, or murder. Right finger. This draft is just under 1,000 words, in storytelling script style, keeping suspense high while using easy, clear American English for YouTube narration. Do you want me to continue with Part 2 right away, keeping the same suspense horror storytelling tone? The Haunting of Eleanor Fairchild, Part 2, Death at the Dinner Table. Movie camera hook. In Part 1, we left the Fairchild mansion on the night of November 17, 1885, a dinner party that ended with whispered secrets, uneasy glances, and a sense of dread hanging in the air. That evening, the Oracle of Exchange Place, Theodore Fairchild, was about to draw his last breath. But what society would later call a tragic heart attack, Eleanor would remember as something far more sinister. The collapse. The moment came during dessert. The Charlotte Russe, Theodore's favorite sweet, had just been served. Crystal glasses sparkled under gaslight, silver clinked softly against porcelain, and Eleanor tried her best to mask the unease she felt. Then it happened. Theodore lifted a spoon to his lips, swallowed, and instantly his face twisted in pain. A strangled gasp escaped him. His spoon clattered onto the plate. His body lurched forward as his hands clawed at his chest. Eleanor screamed as she rushed to his side. Her husband collapsed across the table, knocking wine glasses to the floor. Red liquid splashed across the white cloth, so dark, so thick, it looked like blood. "Theodore," she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes were wide with terror. His lips moved as if forming words, but only a rasping wheeze came out. For a moment, Eleanor was sure he was trying to tell her something, a final warning, but no words ever came. The quick response. Harrison Kensington, the silver-haired banker, snapped into action. "Cromwell, fetch the doctor," he barked. "Wainwright, help Mrs. Fairchild." James Wainwright placed a firm hand on Eleanor's shoulder, guiding her away from the table. His voice was low and almost soothing. "Dr. Henley will be here soon, Mrs. Fairchild. He'll know exactly what to do." But his grip was too strong, almost restraining, and it chilled Eleanor to feel how calm he sounded while her husband lay dying. Within 20 minutes' drive, Percival Henley arrived. He moved with the calm precision of a man who had seen too many of these moments among New York's elite. He checked Theodore's pulse, pressed an ear to his chest, then slowly straightened. "I'm afraid, Mr. Fairchild has passed," he said gravely. "A heart attack. Given his age, his stress, it's no surprise. These tragedies are all too common." And just like that, the life of Theodore Fairchild, the Oracle of Exchange Place, was declared over. Eleanor's world shattered. The swift cover-up. Through her tears, Eleanor barely noticed the hushed conversations that followed. The men spoke quickly with Dr. Henley, their words clipped and deliberate. She didn't see Cromwell quietly gather Theodore's glass and plate. She didn't notice Wainwright signal the butler to clear the entire table at once, faster than she had ever seen servants work. And she barely registered the way drive. Henley nodded when Kensington whispered something into his ear. In that moment, Eleanor was drowning in grief. But later, she would remember. Later, she would realize how strangely efficient everything had been that night. The official story. The days after the funeral blurred into a haze. Newspapers carried the story of Theodore Fairchild's sudden death, calling it a tragic lesson about the dangers of overwork and ambition. Business rivals praised his brilliance. Politicians mourned his influence. Society ladies clutched Eleanor's hands and whispered condolences. But beneath the flood of sympathy, Eleanor's heart kept replaying one memory, the look in Theodore's eyes as he gasped for air. It wasn't the look of a man felled by stress. It was the look of a man betrayed. And the behavior of his three powerful guests, so calm, so practiced, haunted her thoughts. The papers. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor began the grim work of managing her husband's empire. Theodore's lawyer, Cornelius Dalton, guided her with gentle patience, helping her sign papers, review accounts, and understand the vast web of businesses Theodore had left behind. It was overwhelming. Railroads, mines, factories, shipping, even newspapers, the Fairchild fortune stretched farther than she had ever imagined. At first, she admired Theodore's genius all over again. But as she traced his investments, something unsettled her. The timing of his moves was too perfect. He sold railroad stocks just days before catastrophic accidents. He invested in mining claims shortly before rival mines collapsed. He backed shipping firms just before competing vessels went down at sea. Coincidence? Or foresight? The deeper she dug, the more impossible it seemed that Theodore could have known these things by chance. The locked drawer. One evening, Eleanor discovered a locked drawer in Theodore's private study. No key fit, so she summoned a locksmith. When the drawer finally clicked open, Eleanor felt a chill spread through her body. Inside were neatly folded newspaper clippings, every one detailing accidents, deaths, and disasters in industries Theodore had profited from. Each clipping bore Theodore's sharp handwriting in the margins. Dates, notes, calculations. Beneath them lay letters, coded, cryptic, signed only with initials. They spoke of resolving problems permanently, and decisive actions. And one in particular made Eleanor's blood run cold. It was signed HK. The words echoed the whispers she had overheard at that fatal dinner party, the Pittsburgh problem. HK. Harrison Kensington. The man who had comforted her in her grief may have been orchestrating her husband's crimes, perhaps even his death. The isolation. The more Eleanor uncovered, the more alone she felt. Society friends avoided her. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Invitations dwindled. And when she spoke even cautiously about Theodore's business affairs, people smiled tightly and changed the subject. Even Drive. Henley began visiting too often, his polite concern tinged with something darker. He asked probing questions. Are you sleeping well, Mrs. Fairchild? Do you feel nervous? Perhaps too much reading, too much dwelling on the past, could harm your health. Was he trying to dissuade her? Or diagnose her as unstable? Worse still, she began to feel watched. Strangers lingered outside the mansion. Servants moved papers when she wasn't looking. Shadows seemed to follow her down Fifth Avenue. Was it grief making her paranoid? Or had Theodore's death placed her in someone's crosshairs? The confession. By spring of 1886, Eleanor was consumed by her secret investigation. She built timelines, mapped disasters against investments, and confirmed what she already feared: Theodore's fortune was built on blood and ruin. But now, she was beginning to think Theodore had been silenced for knowing too much. One April morning, as she sat in the breakfast room surrounded by ledgers and clippings, her cook, Margaret O'Brien, approached with unusual hesitation. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Fairchild," Margaret said softly, her Irish accent trembling, "but there's something I've been meaning to tell you, about the night Mr. Theodore passed." Eleanor looked up, heart pounding. Margaret's face was pale, her hands twisting in her apron. She lowered her voice, leaning closer. "I saw something, ma'am. Something I don't think they ever wanted you to know." Fire. End of part 2. Fire. What did Margaret see that night in the Fairchild dining room? Was Theodore poisoned? And how deep does this conspiracy go? Stay tuned for part 3 of The Haunting of Eleanor Fairchild. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments what you think Eleanor's cook witnessed. Right finger. That's part 2, around 1,000 words tightened for suspense, clarity, and YouTube-style storytelling, with a hook plus build-up plus shocking cliffhanger. Do you want me to move on and craft part 3 next, where Margaret reveals her secret and the horror escalates? Part 3. The Widow's Curse. God rest his soul. Margaret's weathered hands twisted the edge of her apron as she spoke, her voice trembling like an old door in the wind. I was in the kitchen when Dr. Henley left that evening, she whispered. And I saw him speaking with Mr. Kensington by the garden gate. They didn't know I was watching through the pantry window, but I heard Mr. Kensington say something that's been troubling me fierce. He said, clear as day, the dose was perfect. No one will ever suspect. And then drive, Henley replied, just remember our agreement about the widow. She must never learn what we know. Margaret's eyes filled with guilty dread. They shook hands like they'd sealed some kind of bargain. Ma'am, and it's been eating at me ever since. The words fell into the study like a funeral bell. Eleanor's papers slipped from her hands as the weight of Margaret's revelation pressed upon her chest. If true, then Theodore's death had not been fate, but murder, calculated, deliberate, and disguised with cruel perfection. Her grief hardened into something colder, sharper. Rage. The men who had sat at her table, who had spoken gentle words over her husband's corpse, had poisoned him. Worse still, the doctor she had trusted in her mourning had played the role of executioner. The more Eleanor dwelled on that night, the more sinister details emerged. Dr. Henley had arrived with suspicious swiftness, almost as if he had anticipated the emergency. The dinner guests had managed the chaos with practiced ease, their movements too orderly for genuine panic. And their unease during supper, she had mistaken it for concern. Now she recognized it as anticipation. Her husband's death had been a performance, its tragedy staged for profit. A darker truth. Eleanor plunged into quiet investigation, peeling away layers of polite society to uncover the rot beneath. Kensington's railroad empire had thrived on the sudden collapses of rival lines. Cromwell's shipping business expanded only after mysterious fires gutted competitors' warehouses. Wainwright's textile mills flourished whenever rival owners met premature, tragic ends. The pattern was undeniable. Profits rose as bodies fell. What chilled her most was the precision. Each accident dovetailed with a financial windfall. Each death conveniently silenced a rival. And woven through every case was her husband's uncanny foresight. Theodore had not predicted the market, he had manufactured it with blood. The fortune that had raised her into New York's glittering circles was soaked in death. Every gown, every banquet, every chandelier glittered with the ghosts of ruined families. Her disgust curdled into dread when she noticed her own world shrinking. Invitations ceased. Friends grew cold, whispering excuses as they turned from her on the street. Strangers appeared among her staff, new servants quietly recommended by Kensington's offices. Letters vanished from her desk, then reappeared displaced by a finger's width, as though a phantom hand had rifled through them. Eleanor no longer lived in a home. She lived in a cage built of silk and shadows. The Ledger. In July of 1886, she made the discovery that turned dread into horror. Theodore's safe, long ignored since his death, concealed a false panel. Behind it lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with her husband's precise handwriting. It was no financial book, but a death register. The entries listed names, methods, dates, and profits. Resolved through carriage accident, addressed via apparent suicide, concluded through factory fire, each phrase was a euphemism for slaughter. Each record paired with astonishing profits. Thomas Crawford, railroad executive, carriage accident, October 1883, profit $180,000. Robert Sinclair, shipping magnate, suicide, March 1884, 3 new trade routes secured. William Hayes, textile manufacturer, factory fire, September 1884, insurance gain and acquisitions worth $200,000. And beneath the names were numbers, agents who carried out the work. Agent 7 arranged carriage mishaps. Agent 12 specialized in industrial disasters. Agent 23's handwriting appeared beside poisons that mimicked disease. Theodore himself had been their strategist, selecting targets, timing their deaths, and calculating the financial reward. His partners provided protection, money, and logistics. Eleanor's blood ran cold when she reached the final, unfinished entry. EF. Widow. Excessive curiosity. Permanent resolution required. Her own name, inscribed by her husband's hand, marked for elimination. The living target. From that moment, Eleanor lived as prey. The accidents began immediately. A chandelier crashed from the dining room ceiling moments after she had left its light. A gas valve in her chamber hissed with poison until Margaret's keen nose saved her from suffocation. Her carriage wheels shattered on Fifth Avenue, nearly pitching her into the horse's path. Each incident wore the mask of chance, yet Eleanor knew the Ledger's agents were at work, rehearsing her end. Dr. Henley's visits grew sinister. He examined her not for health but for weakness. His questions pried like knives. Do you believe people conspire against you? Do you suffer hallucinations? Do you doubt your own mind? He was preparing her for a different death, a living burial in a sanitarium. His colleague, Drive, Steinberg, arrived with papers for commitment. Eleanor imagined the asylum's iron bars closing around her, her protests dismissed as delusion. She would waste away in padded rooms until they arranged her final accident. Death, she realized, was not their cruelest weapon. Madness was. The widow's gambit. Terror sharpened her will. If she was marked for death, she would not go quietly. By candlelight she copied the ledger, photographing its pages with a discreet little camera purchased under false pretenses. She compiled every pattern of death, every testimony, including Margaret's damning account. She built a dossier that could bury Kensington, Cromwell, Wainwright, and their entire cabal in scandal and prison. But secrecy was vital. By day she played the grieving widow, attending luncheons and tolerating Drive Henley's ministrations. By night she became her husband's ghost, slipping through corridors, gathering evidence, plotting escape. Her plan was perilous. Distribute her findings to newspapers, federal authorities, and police far beyond New York's reach. Strike swiftly, in many places at once, before the conspirators could suppress the truth. She knew the risks. If caught, she would vanish into the very ledger she sought to expose. The net tightens. As the leaves of autumn began to fall, Eleanor felt the city itself turning against her. Policemen she passed on the street looked at her with hollow eyes, as though already convinced of her madness. Newspaper editors who once courted her favor now avoided her gaze. Even the servants in her household seemed to move like strangers, their loyalty replaced by watchfulness. Each night, the mansion groaned under invisible weight. Each creak of the stair, each whisper of wind against the glass became an omen. She slept rarely, her nerves stretched thin as piano wire. The widow who once presided over glittering banquets now lived in a waking nightmare, stalked by invisible killers and betrayed by the very city that had once applauded her. The conspiracy was closing its jaws. Eleanor had only her wits, her courage, and the fragile hope that truth might be enough to save her. But in the world of the ledger, truth itself was dangerous. And Eleanor Fairchild was already written in ink. This version clocks in around 1020 words, keeps the horror tension escalating, and tightens your narrative so it reads with dread and momentum. Would you like me to structure part 4 as Eleanor actually begins to launch her counterattack, spreading evidence and facing the conspiracy's retaliation, or would you prefer the next part to focus more on her descent into paranoia and the Gothic asylum threat? Part 4. The Last Days of Eleanor Fairchild. The first week of October 1886 should have brought comfort. New York basked in unseasonably warm weather, but for Eleanor Fairchild, the air was heavy with dread. She knew the next few days would decide everything, whether justice would prevail, or whether she would vanish like so many others, her name reduced to a whispered diagnosis in Dr. Henley's ledger. Eleanor's plan was daring, but necessary. 3 meetings in a single day. First, a federal prosecutor at 10. Then an editor from the Herald Tribune at 2. Finally, a detective from Philadelphia at 5. Each man chosen for his distance from the corrupt New York system, each to receive her carefully prepared evidence, copies of Theodore's assassination ledger, Margaret's testimony, and her own analysis linking deaths to fortunes. She even placed one final packet in a safety deposit box, beyond the conspirators' reach, or so she thought. But on the morning of October 8, everything unraveled. Margaret rushed into her chamber, eyes wide with terror. Two strange men loitered outside the mansion, and Dr. Henley had appeared uninvited, accompanied by his sinister colleague. They claimed Eleanor was in the midst of a medical emergency, and demanded to see her immediately. Henley was pale, nervous, his pocket watch snapping open and shut in his hand like a trap. Eleanor understood instantly. They meant to seize her under medical pretense, to lock her away before she could speak a word. Thinking quickly, she had Margaret stall them, claiming she needed a moment to compose herself. In that brief pause, Eleanor gathered the packets of evidence and slipped out the servant's door into a narrow alley. Her desperate escape had begun. The city streets blurred as she fled. She knew she was being followed. The same men appeared block after block, silent, deliberate. Somehow, they already knew her schedule. Somehow, her enemies had anticipated every step. At the prosecutor's office, Eleanor's heart sank. Williams, the one man she thought she could trust, had been called away on an urgent matter. The clerk's flat voice sounded rehearsed. Eleanor left her evidence anyway, though she knew it would never see his hands. At the Herald Tribune, the story was the same. Editor Morrison had fallen ill that very morning and been hospitalized. Eleanor saw through the lie instantly. The network's reach was absolute. By late afternoon, desperation was the only thing carrying her forward. Her final hope was Detective Patrick Kelly of Philadelphia. They had agreed to meet at Grand Central Station, a public place Eleanor thought might keep her safe. She spotted him near the departure board, his broad shoulders unmistakable. But when he turned to face her, his expression was not one of sympathy, it was cold, cautious, and tinged with something darker. "Mrs. Fairchild," Kelly said, "Dr. Henley has explained your situation." Her stomach dropped. He was already compromised. Eleanor pleaded with him, her voice trembling but fierce, "Listen to me. My husband was poisoned. His partners have murdered dozens, always for profit. I have proof." But Kelly only shook his head. His words were gentle, but final. "You've suffered greatly since Theodore's death. These are delusions. Dr. Henley is waiting outside. Please, come peacefully." In that moment, Eleanor saw it all. The trap had closed. The prosecutor, the editor, the detective, every door had been sealed before she even reached it. She was alone, and yet she refused to go quietly. With a sudden burst of strength, Eleanor tore free and ran into the crowded concourse, her voice rising in a scream that echoed across the vaulted ceiling. "They killed my husband, Harrison Kensington, Marcus Cromwell, murderers, all of them. Dr. Henley poisoned Theodore, and now they mean to silence me too." Dozens of travelers stopped to stare. But their faces showed only confusion, discomfort, even pity. Eleanor realized with horror that her enemies had planned for this too. What better way to discredit her than a very public scene? Henley emerged from the shadows, accompanied by white-coated orderlies. His voice, calm and authoritative, carried above Eleanor's screams, "Please, stand back. This poor woman has been suffering terribly since her husband's death. Her grief has made her imagine terrible things. We are here to help her." To the onlookers, it was convincing. Too convincing. Eleanor's desperate cries only made her appear more unhinged. The truth, so monstrous in scale, sounded exactly like madness. She fought as the orderlies seized her, clawing and kicking, shouting the names of the conspirators. But her words fell on ears already closed. And as she was carried away, Eleanor glimpsed him, Harrison Kensington, standing in the station's shadows. His face calm, satisfied. A predator watching his trap spring shut. That evening, Eleanor Fairchild was committed to the Westchester Private Sanitarium under the authority of Dr. Percival Henley. The newspapers reported it as a tragedy of hysteria, a widow unbalanced by grief. Her evidence was confiscated, her voice silenced. Inside the sanitarium, Eleanor's fate was sealed. She was confined, denied visitors, subjected to treatments of cold water and opiates. Her letters were intercepted. Margaret tried to see her but was turned away. A month later, Margaret herself was dead, her stove leaking gas in what the police called a tragic accident. On December 3, 1886, Eleanor was found lifeless in her room. The official report named cardiac failure as the cause. In truth, her body had been flooded with morphine. A therapeutic dose, on paper. A silent execution, in reality. Her funeral was small, attended by servants and a handful of polite acquaintances. Kensington, Cromwell, and Wainwright stood among them, playing their roles as grieving friends. Society applauded their dignity. No one questioned their relief. The New York Times obituary painted Eleanor as a victim of madness, a woman undone by grief and female hysteria. Dr. Henley was praised for his tireless care. Eleanor's fortune passed swiftly into the hands of her husband's associates. The mansion sold, the records burned, every trace of the truth wiped away. The conspiracy endured. Kensington built hospitals and schools, Cromwell's ships carried goods across oceans, Wainwright's mills clothed the nation. Their names were carved in stone as benefactors of progress. Yet beneath their legacies ran blood, silenced witnesses, and the bones of those who had dared to speak. Eleanor Fairchild's story slipped into obscurity, buried in medical files and forgotten obituaries. The woman who had fought so bravely became nothing more than a cautionary tale of feminine fragility, another, hysterical, widow erased by history. But listen closely, and her story still whispers. A warning from the Gilded Age, that the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural at all. They are men in tailored suits, men with fortunes and influence, men who can bend institutions to their will. Men who can silence the truth with a diagnosis. And perhaps the most chilling thought of all, such men did not vanish with Eleanor's death. They adapted, they learned, and they are still among us. So what do you think? Could conspiracies like this really have existed in the shadows of America's Gilded Age? Or is Eleanor's tragedy just another tale written off as madness? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more tales of history's darkest secrets, subscribe, hit the bell, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could be true. This is approximately 1050 words. Would you like me to make the ending more ambiguous, horror, hinting Eleanor might still haunt the sanitarium, or that her evidence packet in the bank survived, or keep it strictly historical tragedy? Part 5. The Haunting of Westchester Sanitarium. The Westchester Private Sanitarium was not built for healing. It was built for forgetting. Perched on a lonely hill above the Hudson, its windows looked out over the river like blind eyes. The corridors were damp, the air thick with chemicals, and the walls so padded and muffled that no scream could ever carry beyond them. After Eleanor Fairchild's death in December of 1886, most assumed her story ended there. Another wealthy widow lost to grief, another name buried beneath the polite euphemism of hysteria. But those who worked inside the sanitarium whispered otherwise. Nurses claimed they still heard her footsteps at night, pacing endlessly in the locked ward where she had been confined. Patients muttered of a pale figure drifting past their doors, a woman in mourning black with hollow eyes. The orderlies, rough men accustomed to suffering, refused to enter her old chamber after sundown. Something unnatural lingered in the air, something that smelled faintly of scorched gas and morphine. At first, Henley dismissed the talk. He explained away the sounds as faulty pipes, the visions as delusions. But even he grew uneasy. More than once, he returned to his desk to find Eleanor's case file lying open, the pages smeared with water stains like tears. One evening, his pocket watch, the very one he had clicked shut while condemning Eleanor, was found shattered on his floor, its hands frozen at the hour of her death. The sanitarium's reputation began to sour. Families who had once trusted it with their troublesome relatives withdrew them suddenly, whispering of strange afflictions spreading through the halls. Henley fought to keep control, but the rumors were relentless. The Westchester Sanitarium was haunted, and it was Eleanor Fairchild who refused to rest. The first true tragedy struck in the spring of 1887. A nurse named Amelia was making her rounds when she heard faint weeping behind Eleanor's former cell door. Thinking a patient had been misplaced, she unlocked it. The room was empty, save for the shape of a woman seated in the corner, her black dress glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Amelia swore the figure lifted its head. "They killed him," it whispered. "They killed me." By morning, Amelia was gone. Her body was never recovered, though her cap was later found floating in the river, 20 miles downstream. After that, staff abandoned the ward entirely. Patients left there grew worse, plagued by nightmares of a widow clutching at their throats, demanding they carry her message to the world. "They killed Theodore," they repeated endlessly, some carving the names Kensington, Cromwell, and Wainwright into the walls with their fingernails until the plaster bled. By autumn, the sanitarium had become a place of dread. Officials urged Henley to shutter it, but the powerful men who funded the institution, Kensington and his partners, insisted it remain open. Closing it would invite questions. Questions that could expose their crimes. So Henley stayed, stubborn and terrified, alone in the crumbling asylum. He grew gaunt, his eyes sunken. The man who had once moved so confidently through New York's finest parlors now jumped at every creak of the stair. He confessed to colleagues that he felt Eleanor's gaze on him always, even in daylight, even in crowded rooms. She was waiting. The final blow came in 1888. One winter night, Henley was discovered sprawled on the sanitarium steps, his body broken as though he had leapt, or been thrown, from the upper floor. Witnesses swore they heard him screaming moments before, shouting Eleanor's name. The official record called it suicide brought on by nervous collapse. But those who saw his body told another story. His hands were torn and bloody, as though he had clawed at something unseen. His eyes were wide, frozen in terror. And faint bruises ringed his throat, the shape of fingers far too slender to be his own. After Henley's death, the sanitarium closed. The patients were moved elsewhere, the building abandoned. Over time, vines crept across its walls, the roof sagged, and the locals avoided the hill entirely. Children dared each other to approach, but none ever lingered. At night, passers-by swore they saw a candle burning in the upper windows, or heard the faint rustle of skirts dragging across stone. And yet the haunting did not stay confined to that cursed building. Within a decade, each of the men who had orchestrated Theodore's murder began to suffer misfortunes too precise to be coincidence. Marcus Cromwell, the shipping magnate, drowned in his own bath. His servants claimed they found his head forced beneath the water, his face pale with horror. Yet the door had been locked from the inside. Silas Wainwright, master of the textile mills, was discovered in his study, his body tangled in curtain cords. Strangled. His dying words, scrawled shakily on the desk blotter, read only, "She's here." And Harrison Kensington, the most ruthless of them all, lasted the longest. For years, he continued to build his empire, ignoring the whispers, silencing his doubts with whiskey. But one winter evening in 1895, he was seen staggering through the streets of Fifth Avenue, clutching his chest and crying out Eleanor's name. He collapsed on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral, eyes wide with terror, as though he had seen her waiting in the shadows. He never rose again. All three deaths were ruled accidents, tragedies of overwork and misfortune. But those who remembered Eleanor Fairchild saw them for what they were, a reckoning. And yet, the story did not end with the men's deaths. For if you visit the ruins of the sanitarium today, locals say you can still hear her. A widow's voice, whispering through the empty halls, demanding that the truth be spoken. Travelers claim the walls weep with water stains that form into words, "They killed him. They killed me." Sometimes, late at night, a single candle flickers in the highest window. And if you are brave enough to step inside, some say you will find her ledger waiting on a dust-covered desk, pages filled with names of men long dead, and others, disturbingly modern. Because Eleanor's vengeance, it seems, was never only for herself. She became something else in that sanitarium, something restless, something eternal. Not just a widow seeking justice, but a specter hunting the powerful who destroy without consequence. And perhaps the most unsettling question is this: if her rage survived death, then who might she be watching now? So if you ever pass a darkened building and hear the faint echo of heels on stone, or a woman's whisper carried on the wind, remember Eleanor Fairchild. Her story was buried as madness, erased by men who thought themselves untouchable. But she was never silenced. She never stopped walking. And perhaps, she never will. End of part 5. 1020 words. Would you like me to keep going with part 6 as Eleanor's haunting spreads into the modern day, urban explorers, historians, or journalists uncovering her truth, or keep it rooted in the 19th century Gothic horror tone? Part 6. The Widow Awakens. The ruins of the Westchester Sanitarium had long since been forgotten by the city that once whispered about it. Time covered the place with ivy and silence, and for decades, it stood as a husk on the hill, its windows blackened, its roof sagging like a corpse left to rot. But ruins never remain empty forever. In the autumn of 2022, 3 students from a local university's journalism program decided to investigate the sanitarium for their final project. They had heard the legends, ghost stories traded in bars and on late-night forums. Eleanor Fairchild, the widow who walked. The mad woman wronged by men of power. The spirit who strangled doctors and drowned magnates. Most dismissed it as myth, but myths, the students argued, are built on truth. They arrived one night with cameras, flashlights, and a borrowed drone. Their names were Kayla, Mateo, and Julian, bright, curious, fearless in the way only the young can be. Kayla, the leader, had grown obsessed with Eleanor's story after stumbling across a brief mention of her case in an old newspaper archive. She wasn't crazy, she told her friends as they climbed the hill. She was silenced. This whole place is a monument to a lie. The sanitarium greeted them with the smell of damp earth and rot. Its great front doors hung loose on rusted hinges, creaking like teeth grinding. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, as though the walls themselves resented intrusion. They began their exploration with laughter, their voices echoing unnaturally in the padded halls. But the laughter faded quickly. Something was wrong with the building's silence. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, it was the silence of listening. "Do you feel that?" Mateo whispered. His flashlight trembled in his grip. "Like the air's watching us," Julian muttered. Kayla only smiled, though her own voice shook. "That's the story breathing. Keep filming." They passed cells with rusted locks, beds bolted to the floor, walls carved with desperate words. "They killed him. They killed me." The same phrases again and again, gouged into plaster until the walls bled dust. "That's her," Kayla whispered, tracing the words with her hand. "This is Eleanor." The deeper they went, the stranger things became. Their cameras glitched, screens rippling with static. Footsteps echoed where none of them walked. At one point, the sound of soft weeping drifted down the corridor, faint as a memory. Julian's voice cracked. "That wasn't one of you." They followed the sound to a locked chamber at the end of the ward. The heavy iron door bore deep scratches, as if someone inside had tried to claw their way out. Kayla knelt, forcing the old lock until it snapped. Inside, the room was nearly bare, but in the moonlight pouring through a cracked window, something gleamed on the floor. A book, its leather warped with age, its pages yellowed and curling. Dust coated everything except the book, as though it had been placed there recently. Kayla picked it up, her hands trembling. It was Eleanor's ledger. The first entries were frantic, her handwriting jagged with desperation. She wrote of her husband's death, of the men who had plotted it, of Henley's betrayal. Then came the accusations. Kensington, Cromwell, Wainwright. She described their crimes in detail, the ink smudged with tears. But the later pages chilled them. The handwriting grew steadier, darker. Eleanor no longer wrote of fear, she wrote of hunger. She listed names long after those men had died. Names of bankers, politicians, factory owners, men tied to the sanitarium's founding. The names continued into the 20th century. Into the 21st. The final page was blank, until Kayla's flashlight flickered, and faint letters began to appear across the paper, as though written by an invisible hand. Kensington's heirs. Cromwell's blood. Wainwright's line. "And you, who carry my story." Kayla gasped, dropping the book. The air turned ice cold. Then came the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, heels striking stone. Mateo swung his flashlight toward the hall. For just a moment, the beam caught her. A woman in black, her veil trailing across the floor, her face pale as marble. Her eyes, hollow and endless, locked on theirs. Julian screamed. The flashlight clattered to the ground. The students bolted, racing through the twisting corridors, their cameras bouncing wildly. But no matter which turn they took, the footsteps followed. Calm, measured, unhurried. "She's playing with us," Kayla cried. At last, they burst into the open night. The drone still hovered above, its camera pointed down at the building. Kayla glanced back only once, and saw Eleanor standing in the doorway, her black veil lifting in the wind, her pale hand reaching out as if beckoning. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. When they finally reviewed the footage, much of it was corrupted. The static grew worse whenever Eleanor appeared. But the drone had captured something unmistakable. A figure at the top window, candlelight glowing in her hand, staring directly into the lens. And beneath it, carved into the wall in fresh, deep letters that none of them remembered seeing. "Tell them, or I will." The students never spoke publicly of what they saw. Their project was quietly abandoned. Julian dropped out of school a month later. Mateo transferred and never returned to New York. Kayla, however, could not let it go. She began to dig deeper, tracing Eleanor's ledger through history. And the more she researched, the more she realized, Eleanor's curse was not just a haunting. It was a judgment, a chain unbroken. Every generation, those connected to the men who had destroyed her would be hunted. And Kayla's own family, she discovered, bore a chilling link. Her great-great-grandfather had been a clerk at Kensington's firm. His name appeared on Eleanor's list. Now Kayla understood why the ledger had called to her. Why the footsteps had followed her more closely than the others. She had not chosen Eleanor's story. Eleanor had chosen her. And late at night, when Kayla worked alone in the archives, she began to hear the sound again. Soft, deliberate, heels on stone, dash dash dash. End of part 6 1020 words. Right finger, do you want me to make part 7 the turning point, where Eleanor's haunting directly claims one of the modern characters, or keep her presence more slow burning, with dread building until the climax? Part 7. The first to fall. Kayla could not sleep. No matter how many lights she left burning in her apartment, no matter how many times she double-checked the locks, the sound followed her. A steady rhythm, always just beyond the walls. Heels on stone. Tap, tap, tap. At first, she convinced herself it was her imagination. Stress, lack of sleep. But soon it grew worse. She heard the sound in the library, in lecture halls, even in the crowded subway. No one else reacted. Only she could hear Eleanor walking. Mateo refused to answer her calls. Julian blocked her number. Both of them wanted to forget. But Kayla couldn't. Something in her blood, something in that ledger's whispered promise, had tied her to Eleanor. One evening, she returned to her apartment to find the door ajar. Inside, everything looked untouched. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. Except for one thing. On the table lay Eleanor's ledger. Kayla froze. She had left it in the university archive under lock and key. Its pages fluttered as though stirred by an invisible breeze. She tried to step back, but her legs locked, her body betraying her. The final page, the one that had once written itself, now bore new words. "One has already broken. One will bleed. Which will you be?" Her phone rang suddenly, shattering the silence. Mateo's name flashed on the screen. "Kayla." His voice was shaking. "You need to listen. It's Julian. Something happened. Dash dash dash. Julian had been found in his dorm room, dead. The police ruled it a suicide. Pills scattered on the nightstand, a note left behind. But Mateo swore the note wasn't his handwriting. "I know him," Mateo said when Kayla met him in a diner 2 nights later. He hadn't shaved, his hands trembled as he stirred his coffee. He wouldn't do that. And the note, Kayla, it looked like the writing in that book. Kayla pulled the ledger from her bag. "It's not just a ghost story. Eleanor's real. She's choosing us." Mateo's face drained of color. "Then why Julian first?" Kayla didn't answer. She didn't have to. The truth gnawed at her. Julian wasn't part of the bloodline. He wasn't a descendant of Kensington or Cromwell. But he had been there, in Eleanor's room. He had seen her. That was enough. The curse wasn't only for the guilty, it was for the witnesses too. That night, Kayla dreamed of Eleanor. She stood at the foot of Kayla's bed, her veil drifting like smoke, her eyes endless pits of sorrow. But her voice was steady when she spoke. You have my story now. You have my blood. Tell it, or join him. When Kayla woke, the veil was gone. But the smell of roses, sweet and rotting, lingered in the room. Matteo insisted they go back to the sanitarium. If we destroy the book, maybe it ends. Kayla wasn't convinced, but she followed him anyway. They drove up the hill in silence, the ruins looming against the night sky like a broken crown. Inside, the air was heavier than before, oppressive with something almost alive. Their flashlights quivered in the darkness, beams cutting through dust motes that twisted like insects. The corridor seemed longer, the walls closer. As though the building itself had shifted since their last visit. Where's the room? Matteo whispered. Kayla pointed ahead. End of the hall. But the hall did not end. No matter how far they walked, the corridor stretched, bending them deeper into the building. Doors lined the walls, some ajar, others sealed, and from within came whispers too faint to understand. Matteo's breath grew shallow. We're not supposed to be here. Kayla gripped the ledger tighter. The pages quivered under her fingers, as though the book itself had a heartbeat. Finally, the endless corridor opened into the chamber where they had first found it. The scratches on the iron door were deeper now, gouged until holes split the metal. Something had been clawing from the inside. Kayla stepped forward, but Matteo grabbed her arm. His face was pale, eyes wide with a terror he couldn't voice. Then the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the room was no longer bare. The bed had returned, rusted and blood-stained. Shackles dangled from the wall, swinging gently as though disturbed by unseen hands. And sitting in the corner was Eleanor herself. She rose slowly, the veil peeling back from her face. Her eyes locked on Matteo first. He bolted. Matteo! Kayla screamed, but he was already gone, his footsteps fading into the labyrinth of halls. Eleanor turned to Kayla. You cannot run, she whispered. Her voice was velvet, threaded with grief and rage. You are of them. You carry their stain. Kayla's chest tightened. She dropped the ledger, stumbling back. I'm not like them. I want to tell your story. I want to make it right. Eleanor's face softened. For a moment, Kayla saw the woman she had been, the grieving widow, the silenced victim. But then her expression twisted, and the air grew so cold that Kayla's breath fogged. Justice is not words, Eleanor hissed. Justice is blood. The candle in Eleanor's hand flared, casting the room in violent light. Shadows writhed across the walls, clawing like the souls of the damned. Kayla screamed, snatching the ledger and fleeing the room. Behind her, Eleanor's footsteps echoed, closer, faster, relentless. She ran blindly through the sanitarium, calling for Matteo, but the halls bent and twisted, swallowing her voice. At last, she burst into the night air, collapsing on the overgrown lawn. The building loomed behind her, silent once more. Matteo never came out. The police found no trace of him. Not in the sanitarium, not anywhere. His car remained in the lot, his wallet on the seat. It was as though he had never existed. Kayla knew better. Eleanor had claimed him. Now, she was the last. And when she returned to her apartment, the ledger lay waiting on her table again. This time, the page was already filled. Only one remains. My blood. My witness. My heir. The ink bled across the paper, twisting into a new message that chilled her to the bone. You cannot bury me. You will become me. Kayla dropped the book, her hands trembling. From the corner of her apartment, the sound began again. Heels on stone. Closer this time. Inside. End of part 7, 1035 words. Right finger. Would you like part 8 to become the true possession chapter, where Eleanor begins to take Kayla over, or should I keep Eleanor as an external ghost until the grand finale in part 10? Part 8. Becoming Eleanor. Kayla stopped answering her phone. Stopped going to class. Stopped eating, except when her body forced her to. The footsteps never ceased now. No matter where she went, apartment, street, library, they followed. Not faint anymore, not distant. Always just behind her, as though Eleanor were leaning close, whispering her breath against Kayla's neck. At first, Kayla resisted. She tried to drown the sound with music, with TV, with pills. But silence always returned, and in the silence Eleanor's voice grew louder. Tell them, write me, let me live. When Kayla opened her notebook, the words spilled without her willing them. Not her handwriting, not her phrasing. The story came through her in jagged sentences. Eleanor's pain poured like poison onto the page. She wrote of betrayal, of nights chained in darkness, of madness gnawing at the edges of sanity. She wrote until her hands cramped and her eyes blurred with tears, and still the pen scratched on. When she finally stopped, hours later, her notebook was filled. And every word was Eleanor's. The changes began slowly. At the cafe across the street, a barista greeted her by name. Kayla stared blankly, unable to remember the man's face, though she had seen him 100 times before. But when she glanced into the glass of the pastry case, her reflection was wrong. The hair was darker, the skin paler, and behind her eyes lingered a grief that wasn't hers. She staggered home, trembling, refusing to look into mirrors. That night, she dreamed of a wedding. Rows of candles flickered in a grand stone hall. Guests whispered behind lace fans. At the altar stood Eleanor, veiled, trembling. Across from her, a groom whose face was shifting, always unfamiliar. Kayla watched from the pews, yet when Eleanor turned her head, Kayla saw her own face beneath the veil. She woke screaming. Her friends tried to reach out. A knock at her door, texts piling up, voicemails begging her to call back. But Kayla couldn't answer. Words felt dangerous now, as though Eleanor might slip into the spaces between them and take root in anyone who listened. Instead, she stayed inside, curtains drawn, surrounded by candles. She had read somewhere that flame kept spirits at bay. But it didn't keep Eleanor away. The ledger lay on her desk, always open to the newest entry. She tried throwing it out once, leaving it in a dumpster across town. But when she returned, there it was, sitting on her bed, waiting. This time the page bore only 2 words. Almost ready. Kayla began losing time. She would sit at her desk, blink, and suddenly it was morning. The candles had burned down to stubs. Her notebook pages were filled with words she didn't remember writing. She found sketches, too. Drawings of faces she had never seen, corridors that stretched into darkness, and always, the veil. A long, trailing shroud, stained and tattered. Once, she awoke to find her hands bruised, her nails cracked and dirty. In the sink was mud, thick and black, as though she had been clawing at the earth. She scrubbed herself raw, but the dirt never fully came off. One evening, desperate for answers, Kayla searched her grandmother's attic. She had avoided the place since childhood, but now it called to her. Dust hung heavy in the beams, the air stale with forgotten things. She found a trunk at the back, locked with rust. Inside lay bundles of old letters, yellowed with age. They were love letters, from Eleanor to Samuel Cromwell. Kayla's breath caught as she read. The words were tender, aching with longing. But the replies, cold, dismissive, commanding. Samuel had never loved her. He had used her, then cast her aside when she became inconvenient. One letter bore Eleanor's final plea. If you will not love me, at least remember me. Do not let me vanish into silence. Kayla's hands shook as she folded the letter back. She understood now. Eleanor wasn't just haunting, she was demanding remembrance. Demanding to be made immortal. And Kayla was her chosen vessel. The possession grew bolder. In the mirror, Eleanor's face replaced hers for longer and longer stretches. At first, a flicker. Then, full minutes. Kayla screamed, but the reflection didn't. Instead, Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that Kayla couldn't feel. When she turned away, the smile lingered in her own mouth. Neighbors began avoiding her. In the hall, Mrs. Green muttered a prayer under her breath when Kayla passed. Children whispered about the woman with the funeral veil, though Kayla wore no such thing. And at night, the footsteps no longer followed, they circled around her bed, closer and closer, until they stopped just beside her pillow. Once, she felt a hand stroke her hair. Cold, gentle, possessive. She didn't dare move. The breaking point came when she visited campus one last time. She told herself she was going to the library for research. But when she came to, she was standing in front of her professor's office, the ledger clutched to her chest. Her professor looked up in confusion as she entered. "Kayla, you look pale. Are you?" The words cut off. His eyes widened. Kayla frowned. "What?" Then she realized, her voice was not her own. It was lower, resonant, dripping with sorrow and rage. Eleanor's voice. The professor backed away, knocking books from his desk. "What are you?" Kayla blinked. Suddenly she was holding a shard of glass from a broken frame. The professor pressed against the wall, terrified. She dropped it, bolting from the room, heart hammering. Outside, she doubled over, retching onto the pavement. The ledger fell open at her feet. "You are mine, my story, my vessel. Soon, my name will live again." Kayla staggered back, tears streaking her face. She realized then that the curse had never been about revenge alone. Eleanor didn't just want to punish the guilty. She wanted resurrection. Through Kayla. That night, Kayla burned the letters, the sketches, the journals, everything she had touched since Eleanor entered her life. But when she returned to her desk, the ledger sat unharmed among the ashes, pages fluttering as if laughing. Her notebook was open to a new line, written in her own handwriting. "The wedding is set. The bride is ready." Kayla covered her face, sobbing. She felt the veil even then, brushing against her hair, tightening around her throat. And in the mirror across the room, Eleanor stood in her place. Not a reflection anymore. Waiting. End of part 8. 1024 words. Right finger. Do you want me to make part 9 the wedding chapter, where Eleanor forces Kayla into a ritual reenactment of her doomed marriage, or keep ramping the possession until the final explosion in part 10? Part 9. The bride's return. The veil arrived first. Kayla found it draped across her bed one morning, yellowed lace, frayed at the edges, yet impossibly whole, as though centuries had passed without touching it. She hadn't brought it there. She hadn't even owned such a thing. When she touched it, her fingers numbed, as if blood had stopped flowing. She tried to throw it away. Out the window, into the trash, even into a fire. But always, when she turned, it was back on her bed, folded neatly, waiting. That night, she dreamed of bells. They clanged, hollow and endless, echoing through her skull until she jolted awake, clutching her ears. But when she opened her eyes, the sound hadn't stopped. Somewhere outside, bells were tolling. And the veil was no longer on the bed. It was on her head. The days bled together after that. Kayla no longer felt in control of her body. She moved, but not by choice. Ate, but not from hunger. Walked streets she didn't recognize, always carrying the ledger, as though her hands refused to let it go. Her reflection in windows showed Eleanor more clearly now, sometimes so clearly that strangers on the street crossed themselves or backed away. One man spat in the gutter. "Bride of death," he muttered, not daring to look her in the eye. Kayla wanted to scream that it wasn't her, that she was trapped. But her lips moved on their own, curling into Eleanor's cold smile. It happened on the night of the storm. Rain hammered the windows, thunder rattled the air, and Kayla sat in her darkened apartment surrounded by candles that sputtered in the draft. The ledger lay open, its words shifting as though written by an invisible hand. "It is time." Her body rose. Not her choice. Each step heavy, deliberate. She dressed without thought, slipping into the veil, into a gown she hadn't owned before that moment. A dress of faded white, stained at the hem with mud that smelled of graves. When she looked into the mirror, Eleanor stared back, radiant in her decay. "Walk," the reflection whispered. And Kayla obeyed. She found herself outside, rain soaking the gown, the veil clinging to her skin. Yet she did not shiver. The night guided her, pulling her through empty streets toward the edge of town. There, a church stood where no church had been before. Its spire clawed at the storm clouds, windows glowing with a sickly light. The doors yawned open, waiting. Kayla stepped inside. Candles lined the pews, though no hands had lit them. Their flames burned green, casting long, writhing shadows. The air smelled of mildew and dust, as if the building had been abandoned for centuries. And yet, the congregation was full. Figures sat in every pew, faces hidden by veils, hands folded in silence. Kayla couldn't see their eyes, but she felt them, heavy and watchful. The air hummed with expectation. At the altar stood a man. Tall, faceless. His outline flickered, shifting between groom and corpse, between stranger and shadow. Her breath caught. Every step forward was a battle, yet her feet obeyed the rhythm of a funeral march disguised as wedding bells. Dearly beloved, a voice croaked from the pulpit. Kayla looked up to see the officiant. It was no priest but a skeletal figure in rotted robes, its mouth stretched wide in a grin of worms. The ledger lay open in its bony hands, pages fluttering. We gather here to unite bride and memory, flesh and shadow, vessel and spirit. The congregation stirred, a rustle of whispers like dry leaves. Kayla's knees shook. She tried to resist, to scream, but the veil tightened around her throat, choking sound. Do you, Eleanor Cromwell, take this vessel, to have and to hold, to wear and to wield, until death is forgotten? The groom's faceless head tilted. Silent. Waiting. Kayla shook violently, whispering through clenched teeth. No. But the veil constricted, and another voice spoke from her mouth, soft and trembling with joy. Yes. The faceless groom extended his hand. His touch was ice, burning her skin. Kayla tried to pull back, but her hand moved of its own accord, placing itself in his. The officiant raised the ledger high. Lightning flared through the stained glass, illuminating the congregation. For the first time, Kayla saw their faces, skeletal, eyeless, gaping mouths frozen in silent screams. They weren't guests. They were the forgotten, victims of Eleanor's curse, souls swallowed by her need to be remembered. And Kayla was about to join them. Then by sorrow and silence, the officiant intoned, "You are bound." The congregation rose as one, their veils lifting. Their mouths opened, and a single word thundered from their throats. Eleanor. The church trembled. The candles flared. The veil on Kayla's head sealed tight, pressing into her skin like a second skull. She gasped, clawing at it, but her hands were weak, obeying Eleanor. The groom's faceless head lowered toward hers, as though for a kiss. Darkness spilled from his mouth, pouring into her. Kayla convulsed, choking, drowning in shadow. And then, her mind snapped free. She saw it all at once. Eleanor's life, her betrayal, her torment, her endless hunger for memory. But beneath it, a truth Eleanor had hidden even from herself. It wasn't just about remembrance. It was about domination. She hadn't been cast aside, she had been denied control. And now she sought to take it, through anyone foolish enough to open her book. Kayla screamed, not in despair, but in fury. No, you will not wear me. Her body buckled, the veil ripping slightly at the edge. Eleanor shrieked inside her head, a howl that split her skull. The congregation staggered, flickering like dying flames. The groom's grip weakened, faceless head jerking violently as though struck. Kayla tore at the veil, ripping it halfway from her face. The air around her pulsed with resistance, shadows clawing at her, but she fought with everything left in her soul. Lightning split the roof of the church, striking the altar. The ledger caught fire in the officiant's hands, green flames devouring the pages. The congregation screamed as one, collapsing into ash. The groom dissolved into mist. Kayla stood at the center, the veil still clinging but torn, her breath ragged, her body trembling. The fire roared around her, consuming pews, walls, memories. And through the flames, Eleanor's voice hissed. Not yet. The vows are not broken. The wedding is not finished. Kayla staggered back, clutching the half-torn veil, her heart hammering. The church collapsed around her in fire and thunder. When she stumbled outside into the rain, she realized she was still wearing the gown. still clutching the veil, and the ledger, though burned, lay intact at her feet. On its charred page, fresh words bled through the ash. Tomorrow, the ceremony continues. End of part 9, 1027 words. Fire. Do you want part 10 to be the grand finale where Kayla either destroys Eleanor forever, or becomes her permanent vessel? Part 10. Till death is not enough. The veil would not come off. No matter how Kayla clawed at it, tore at it, burned it, it always healed, stitching itself whole like living flesh. The charred edges from the fire smoothed overnight, the lace whitening again as if mocking her efforts. When she stared into the mirror, half her face was hers, the other half Eleanor's. The division was not clean. Sometimes her eye would shift to Eleanor's shade of green. Sometimes her smile would stretch into that cold, knowing curl. She was being worn, and the ledger, the cursed, charred ledger, remained. It followed her like a shadow. If she left it behind, she'd wake to find it on her chest, pages fluttering against her heartbeat. The words inside now shifted constantly, a new vow written with every breath. The ceremony must be finished. Kayla hadn't slept in 3 days. Not truly, not without hearing the bells. On the 4th night, the dreams bled into waking. She sat in her apartment, lights off, hands pressed over her ears. The bells tolled anyway, vibrating through her teeth, rattling her ribs. She screamed until her throat bled. And then came the knock. Slow, measured, inevitable. 3 times, heavy as coffin lids. Kayla staggered to the door. Through the peephole, no one waited. Only darkness, thicker than the storm. Yet she knew, whatever stood there was not asking. It was summoning. She locked the door, shoved a chair against it, backed away. The knock came again, louder. The hinges groaned. She grabbed the ledger, meaning to throw it, to destroy it, but the instant her hands touched the cover, her mind twisted. Visions filled her. Eleanor in a gown that never aged, standing before the faceless groom, smiling with infinite patience. Kayla dropped the book. Her hands smoked as if burned. The door burst inward. The congregation returned. They spilled into the apartment in silence, veiled and skeletal, their feet not touching the ground. Candles flared to life without flame, circling Kayla, hemming her in. And then she appeared. Eleanor. No longer faint in glass or shadow, but whole, radiant, terrible, a bride of bone and memory. Her gown shone white as snow, though streaked with rust at the hem. The veil fluttered though no wind stirred. Kayla, she said, her voice velvet and command. Enough games. You are weary. Give yourself to me. End the pain. Kayla shook her head, backing against the wall. You're not alive. You're not real. You're nothing but a memory. Eleanor's smile cut like a knife. And yet, you are mine. The congregation whispered her name, over and over, Eleanor. 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 Kayla clamped her hands over her ears, but the word burrowed deeper than sound, it carved itself into her bones. She thought of her mother then. The woman who'd raised her alone, who'd whispered that strength wasn't about being unbroken, but about standing even when cracked. Kayla seized that memory like a lifeline. She screamed back at the voices, at the veil, at the bride before her. No, you will not wear me. I am not your dress. I am not your coffin. The candles guttered. The congregation faltered. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You dare defy me? Kayla reached for the ledger, though it burned her palms raw. She held it high like a weapon. You want vows? Then hear mine. I refuse you. Lightning split the sky outside. The apartment walls trembled. The ledger's pages tore free, whirling into the air like razor leaves. They circled Kayla, then Eleanor, words glowing as though written in fire. The congregation shrieked. Their veils caught flame, their bodies unraveling into ash. But Eleanor only laughed. You cannot destroy me, she said, stepping forward through the storm of burning pages. Her gown did not scorch. Her veil did not tear. I am every memory denied. I am every name forgotten. I am the hunger at the edge of silence. And you are already mine. She reached for Kayla, hands pale, fingers sharp. Kayla acted without thought. She pressed the burning ledger against her own chest. The fire tore through her like a blade of light. Her body convulsed, every nerve aflame, her scream merging with Eleanor's in a chorus of rage. The veil fused to her skin, then tore, then fused again, fighting itself. For one moment, one sliver of eternity, Kayla and Eleanor were one. She saw every bride, every victim, every soul swallowed. She saw their faces, hollowed by the weight of another's memory. And she made her choice. Kayla forced the flames inward, into herself. Not to be free, but to contain. To lock Eleanor where she could never escape. The ledger screamed, pages blackened, binding not outward, but inward. The congregation vanished in a final sigh of ash. And then, silence. Dash dash dash. When Kayla woke, dawn bled through the broken door. The veil was gone. The gown too. She lay in her own clothes, trembling, the air thick with smoke. The ledger rested at her side, its cover cracked, its pages nothing but cinders. She touched it, and for the first time, it did not follow. It did not burn. She laughed weakly. She had done it. She had ended it. But then she caught her reflection in the shattered glass of her coffee table. Her smile lingered too long. Her eyes glinted green, and somewhere deep in her chest, beneath her heartbeat, she heard the faintest echo of bells. Dash dash dash. The last line of ash on the floor spelled words she had not written. Till death is not enough. Drop of blood. If this story chilled your bones and kept you on edge, don't let it end here. Bell subscribe for more terrifying tales that will haunt your nights. Thumbs up like if you dared to read till the end. Speech balloon comment your favorite scary moment if you're brave enough. Loudspeaker share this with friends, let them join the nightmare too. Dare to keep reading, if you think you can survive.